Welcome to the Same Side Selling Podcast. I am your host, Ian Altman. Why do potential clients stick with their existing vendors? This is a question that I hear all the time when I work with companies, and let me demystify a little bit of what's going on. In order to change from their existing provider to you, your potential clients have to do two things that make human beings a little bit uncomfortable. The first thing is that they have to fire the person who they liked enough to hire to begin with. And the second thing they have to do is they have to acknowledge that maybe they made a mistake when they hired those people originally. This is one of the reasons why you might identify areas that their current provider is deficient, and your potential client says, "Oh, thanks," and they tell their existing provider to fix those things, and then they stick with that existing provider. There's a level of comfort with the status quo. There's a level of comfort when it says, you know what, these people are doing an okay job, and switching to you could just introduce new risk or new unknowns. Now, maybe we give them a reason why their needs have changed. Maybe they outgrew their existing providers. Maybe they need a more modern approach. Maybe their situation has changed, so whoever they hired before was a great decision, but their needs have changed, and as their needs have changed and their requirements have adapted, that vendor no longer satisfies their needs anymore. Now, the other big reason why when you contact somebody, they say, "Oh, I already have an existing provider," and they immediately push you to the side, is because sellers often make the mistake of describing what you are selling instead of why they might care about what it is that you can solve for them. So what do sellers do to try and earn the attention of their customers? Well, they use a lot of techniques that just don't work anymore. So they might ask them, well, what keeps you up at night? Or they might ask them, well, what's the biggest area where we might be able to help you? And guess what? Here's the unfortunate reality. You know that the biggest area you can often help your potential client is an area where they currently have a blind spot. They don't see that area as a problem. So if you ask them, what's the biggest issue keeping you up at night? They're going to give you whatever the most recent thing is. And in most cases, you haven't earned the right to ask that question. So when you ask, they're like, well, why would I tell you anyhow? Because you haven't established that you have offer anything of value for them yet. So if they don't perceive a problem with their existing vendor, switching implies a level of risk. So your job is to minimize their perceived risk of change and any friction associated with making that change. People in financial services figured this out a long time ago. The two biggest impediments to people switching from one financial advisor to another, or one insurance agent to another, the two biggest ones are, number one, I don't want to have to tell my existing provider. And number two, I got to fill out all that paperwork. So anybody good in that field offers two things. One, look, I'm happy to contact your existing provider and let them know that you've switched. And that way you don't need to have the uncomfortable conversation with the vendor you haven't heard from in 3 years. And number two, we will fill out all the paperwork for you. You just have to sign it. So all that redundant information, they've got systems that automatically fill all that out. You just sign it in the end, you're done. So they remove that friction for you. Keep in mind that if your client or prospect switches from their existing vendor to you and they don't have a great experience, in their mind, it's worse than just staying with their existing provider. And if you reach out to people and say, hey, I might be able to save you 5% or 10%, you've just now told them that the single most important thing is price, not value or results, and then you'll contact me and complain that your clients just focus on price. If they are thrilled with their existing provider and you don't offer a compelling alternative, then leave the door open for future conversations. You can say, hey, I'm really glad that you're being well served by your existing provider. In fact, not everyone we talk to is in that position. Would you be open to me following up with you in, let's say, 4 to 6 months to see if we're offering anything new or if anything's changed on your side? And of course, if I can be of any service between now and then, feel free to reach out. I'll send you a quick email. But my guess is probably 6 months is a reasonable time frame for me to reach out to you again just to see if anything new is going on. What you're doing is saying, look, if you're happy and I don't have something compelling, I'm not going to keep haranguing you till I piss you off. Instead, I'm going to make sure that I'm seen as somebody who adds value. So when you reach out, what you want to do is say, look, oftentimes people in your position reach out to me when they're facing one of 2 or 3 problems with their current solution. They either can't do this, they can't do this, or they can't do that. If one of those stands out, we probably have something worth talking about. And if not, there's probably not much for us to talk about. I don't want to waste either one of our time. Does one of those stand out for you? And that way you're leading with the problems that you solve, and you're acknowledging right at the beginning that you're not just there to sell something, because if they don't have a need, you don't want to waste either of your time. So next time you're reaching out to somebody, look at it through their lens. Think about what could be going on in their world that we might be good at solving. What might they be experiencing negatively with their existing provider that I could speak to that gets them to think, hey, maybe I should talk to you. And if it turns out that they're thrilled with who they have and you don't offer something compelling, guess what? Leave the door open and let them know you're not going to keep harassing them, but you'll follow up in 4 to 6 months. And you'll probably build a level of trust so that if something does go sideways, you're the person they reach out to. Drop me a note at ian@ianaltman.com. Please feel free to share this, comment, let me know what you think, and I'll see you next week on the Same Side Selling Podcast. So long.